We good? Well, good morning, everybody who's joining us either here or online. We want to welcome you. Glad you're here. Good morning. We are walking slowly through the Gospel of Matthew. We have been just plodding our way along, looking at a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We are in chapter 18 currently, if you want to go ahead and be turning over there. And chapter 18, there's a lot going on. Just to catch us up on the context of everything that's happening, chapter 18 opens with them, the disciples asking Jesus, who is the greatest? And you remember this story. Jesus then brings a child among them and says, unless you change and become like little children, then you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. But he goes on to talk about that this is more than just becoming childlike. He is saying, I want you to become little children. And we talked about how that's an allusion to the same thing that he's talking about with Nicodemus. It's about being born again. He's already talking about new life as a disciple and what that's going to look like. And then he talks about the stumbling blocks and woe to the world through whom these stumbling blocks come. And that brings us to where we are this morning. He's still in the context of talking about the little ones, but he's the little ones now that he's talking about, he's expanded that out to the metaphor is not just children. He's not just talking about actual little ones anymore. He's using that as a metaphor for those who would be disciples. And so this is these us as we have become children in the kingdom of heaven. So you with me so far? That's important because it's easy to lose that. He says, see that you do not despise, verse 10, see that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. Now last week we left there, and there's a couple of things that I want us to talk about here because there's a lot of baggage that comes out of this verse. First of all, see that you do not despise. What does that mean? Well, the word that's used there literally means to think down. That's the literal translation, to think down. So it is talking about holding someone in contempt or deeming them unworthy or in some way scorned or despised. And so this is more than just thinking bad about someone. This is looking down, scorning, despising, rejecting. And so, and remember, we said this is not just children. So see that you do not despise one of these little ones. Now, these little ones are disciples. It's followers of Jesus. And so see that you do not look down on, scorn, hold in contempt one of these disciples, one of these who have changed and become little ones in the kingdom. And he gives the reason. This is why. That for is always it always harkens back to whatever came before it. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. Now, you've heard of the idea of the guardian angel. And you think, well, where does that idea come from in Scripture? Well, this is one of the key verses that they use to talk about the idea of guardian angels. Now, the problem is there's a lot about that which makes no sense. For example, if the angel is supposed to be guarding us, it's not doing a real good job of it. Because where is it at? It's in heaven. And what's it doing? Looking on the face of the Father. It's not watching what I'm doing. It's looking on. So that doesn't make any sense. It's not down here with me. And so remember, you've heard me say before, much of our understanding of angels and demons and heaven and hell doesn't come from Scripture. It comes from Dante and Milton and a bunch of those guys who wrote about things, and we've incorporated that into our collective consciousness in America and really in the West as a whole, and that's our understanding of these things, but that's not what Scripture says. And so you get this idea so part of our problem is our understanding of angels, okay? Part of our problem is our understanding of what angels are and who they are and what they do. Because we either have this idea of the pudgy little cherub, that's got his little bow and arrow, and you're going to see him a lot next week, right? For Valentine's Day, he's gonna be with his little wings and he's gonna be shooting arrows at people, or lately in Christian literature, you see the idea of the big, glorified warrior person. Whether it's male or female, they're usually in some kind of warrior garb with great big wings and a flaming sword or something like that. And the problem is, both of those are, but not really correct. So what is the definition of an angel? Anybody want to jump in on that? What's the definition? Messenger, absolutely. That's the literal definition of the word angel. It's a messenger, a being who is usually sent with a message from God. Most of the time in Scripture, when we see an angel show up, they're bringing a message from God. They're bringing a message to someone or to a group or something like that. They are in some way a conduit for God sending a message. Jason? So yes, but both. But it's usually good news, but it's not always. Sometimes it's very scary, and so the idea that each believer has an angel to guard them and a demon to tempt them did not come from Scripture. That arose in extra biblical writings. For example, a guy called the Shepherd of Hermas teaches that each person has two angels, one good and one evil. That was one of the part of the apocryphal literature. If you show up on Wednesday night, Tim was talking about that in class on Wednesday night. Some of those early writings that aren't really part of Scripture because they don't fit in there in the proper way, and that's a whole nother class. But that's a plug for Tim's class on Wednesday night. If you want to show up, there's a lot of good information in there. Another one is the Epistle of Barnabas. That's another one of these apocryphal books that describes God's angels as protectors of the way of light, and says that Satan has angels who are guarding the ways of darkness. The most significant was a guy named Origen, who wrote in his first principles that every human soul is put in subjection to some angel. There's a bunch more that we could talk about, but y'all don't really care about those, so I'm not going to bore you to death with Basil of Caesarea and Gregory the Great and the medieval theologians who expanded all this. But none of these claims are really grounded in Scripture. This is just a lot of people's imagination, and they take things and they run with them, and so you get a lot of stuff that is not that's not scriptural. So what is this talking about? Well, we've said that little ones refers to believers, right? Little ones is not just children. It's every believer who has become a child of God, who has changed and become a child in the kingdom. And so instead of the idea that every believer has an angel in heaven assigned to them, it's more appropriate to look at this as these messengers, all right, are representing individuals in the face of God. So it's like we have these, it's like Jesus is saying, don't look down on or despise your fellow believers. Because when you do, when you scorn that person, when you reject that person, they have a cosmic defense attorney who is pleading their case in heaven before God. And so now it starts to make a little more sense. He's saying when you're looking down on, casting scorn on, contempt, despise, whatever words you want to use there, one of these who are following me, one of these little ones who has changed and become a child in the kingdom, when you're doing that, then their messenger, remember that's the word, angel is literally messenger, their messenger is literally looking on the face of God in heaven. And so Jesus' warning now is much more serious than just they have an angel over their shoulder telling them not to do bad things, right? They have a messenger who is taking their message to the face of God in heaven. And so it's a little bit scarier, you know. So let's talk about in that context now this idea of despising. How do we despise or show contempt for or literally to look down on another believer? What situations cause us to put ourselves in that situation that Jesus is talking about? Now remember, he's talking about, the context here is about stumbling blocks, right? He just got through saying, woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Those things are going to come. But again, woe, that means I'm grieved for those through whom those stumbling blocks come. I'm grieved for those who will cause one of these little ones to stumble. He says it's better for you to have a giant rock strapped around your throat and thrown into the ocean than it is for you to cause one of these to stumble. I think if you look at the context, right, it looks like these are just the disciples. Now, not just the apostles, but the disciples. And remember, we've talked about there's like expanding circles, right? There's Peter, James, and John. That's kind of the inner circle. And then that expands out to the 12. And then that expands out to the disciples, the group that followed him, that some of them were the benefactors who helped pay for things and who did all these things. And so in verse 1, at that time the disciples came to Jesus, and so to me, and this is just my imagination too, but to me it looks like they're in kind of a private conflab. This is not a public proclamation as much as it is among his disciples. Now, not just the 12 though, the expanded group that's following him. And he says all this stuff about causing people to sin, and remember, then he went through the whole dismemberment thing, and he says if where you're going is going to cause people, if the path you're treading, remember that's feet, if the path you're treading is causing people to stumble, cut it out. If what you're doing, that's the hands, is causing people to sin, cut it out. If how you view the world, that's your eye, is cut out. And so the idea then he expands into this idea that we're getting there. Verse 10. I'm sorry, I lost my place. So then he expands that into, so see that you don't look down on, despise, hold in contempt any of these little ones, because their messenger is standing before God in heaven. So with that context in mind, he's talking about causing people to stumble. With that context in mind, how do we look down on? How do we despise? Kelly? Right. Very good. Very good. Let me rephrase that for the folks at home, because what Kelly said was that it's off that the Jewish tradition became part of their mark of faith, that to be a Christian you had to be circumcised and you had to uphold all these and Paul comes along and says, no, stop that. That's not what this is about. And now we're seeing a lot of the same things, because we have generations of people who say, well, I'm spiritual but I'm not religious. I believe in Jesus but I don't go to church. And part of that is because of the tradition that we've put on people. Am I rephrasing you pretty well there? I try to do that for the folks that can't hear you. That's good. I totally buy that. That's one of the ways that we can look down on, or remember, we're talking in the context of causing someone to stumble, and we said last time, stumble is not to get offended or to get my feelings hurt. It's to fall away from, to turn away from, to somehow lose faith. Cody? Absolutely. That's Cody's pointing out that in the next few verses, he's going to use that lost sheep metaphor. And he's still talking about those same little ones, those little ones who've stumbled, those little ones who have fallen away, those disciples who we've somehow looked down on and caused to fall away. Okay. Doug says, I'm just rephrasing for the folks that are. Okay. That this passage gets weaponized because we say, well, you didn't comply with this particular tradition, and therefore you're going to be sending other people to hell. You're going to cause other people to stumble, and so therefore you shouldn't do that. And again, that's where we get back to that definition of stumbling. Because I'm talking about when I was a youth minister, these teenagers clapping during the song is going to cause people to stumble. And I went, should we be praying for your soul because you're going to fall away from faith? Well, that's not what I said. Well, no, but that's what you're using that, and that's you're not saying you're going to fall away from faith. You're saying you're going to get your feelings hurt, and that's a totally different thing. Kara? Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. That this is still in the context of who's the greatest. That's the question that spurred this whole section. And so as they're talking, they're thinking in the back of their mind, okay, well, I'm one of these little ones, but who's the greatest little one? Who's the most important little one? Because I should be more important than these over here. And he's still showing that don't despise, don't look down on somebody else. Cody, you had your hand up. The one wandering off may not be the one that is needing help as much as the one who is judging and doing the looking down on. Absolutely. But we don't see that a lot of times. And remember, this whole context is about how to live in the kingdom. Remember, the question that spurred the question that got this going was, who's the greatest? And Jesus says, unless you change and become like this little child, you're not going to be. You want to know how to be great in the kingdom? You got to be the lowest. That's literally what he says. You got to be the lowest, and the lowest was a child. The one little sheep is important. Let's go ahead and look at that in verse 12, because that's what he's going to expand this now in typical Jesus fashion. He gives them a hard truth, and then he provides them with some kind of illustration, and then he comes back and he doubles down on that hard truth, and then he's going to tell them a story that's still going to further illustrate that point. Verse 12, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one who wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he's happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish. Still in the context of these little ones, he's still talking about the same thing, right? And if one of these little ones that we despise or look down on or hold in contempt is then therefore wandered away. Now, we always read this story in the context of sin, right? That the sheep has wandered off into sin. But that's not what he's talking about in this time. Now, in other times when he tells this same story in other Gospels, it is about sin. This one, though, is not. What is the context here? It's one of these little ones who has been despised and looked down on and caused to stumble, to fall away by something that someone else did. Now, that millstone's starting to hurt, isn't it? You know what I'm saying? I mean, y'all, we've got churches whose entire identity is built on pushing people away, whose entire existence is built on telling everybody else how they're hell. And I'm going to tell you that millstone hurts because it's tied around there pretty tight. Because Jesus says that one that you pushed away, that one that you looked down on, that you condemned, that you whatever, that one that you drove out is more important than the 99 that are sitting in the church building. But that's not the way we think. We think, well, we're here, we're in our church building, they know where we're at, they can come right back. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus says we need to be going after that person. Jason? There you go. There you go. The body metaphor. Jesus is going to come back to that in a different section, but it's the same thing. So I think the question is, how can we? And now I'm taking this home. Now we've gone big and we've talked about the world and the disciples and everything at large. But let's talk about us. Okay? How can we as disciples do a better job of seeking those who have wandered away? Because some of you who've been around here a while, you know there's somebody in your head right now that you're thinking of that has wandered away or has somehow been driven away or has somehow, whatever reason. And you know who I'm talking about. And I don't have anybody in my mind, but I know some of you do. How can we do a better job of reaching out to those people, Cody? We got to seek them. We got to follow them. Okay? I buy that, to leave the 99 and go to where they're at. What else? Anybody? Kara? Right. The door is still open to go and doesn't want to come back. That right. Yeah. Very good. That's a good point. Cody points out that the King James uses mountains instead of hills, and that creates a different picture in my mind. If I'm going to go through the hills looking for a sheep, that's kind of a leisurely stroll, you know. But if I'm going to climb a mountain looking for a sheep, and then I'm going to bring that sheep back down that mountain, that's not an easy task. That requires a little bit more work than just roaming the hills. And I buy that. I think that makes a good point. I think if we look at this, Spurgeon says the first temptation is to despise one because only one. The next is to despise one because that one is so little. The next and perhaps the most dangerous form of temptation is to despise one because that one has gone astray. And so that the idea that now, but then what do we do when that sheep don't want to come back? I mean, that happens, right? You know, because there are sheep that want to hold the 99 hostage. I'm not coming back until you do this, this, and this. That's a different story, because that's not that now you're not despised and rejected as much as you're doing something different. And he's going to get into that here in a minute, because we're going to start talking about forgiveness, and he's going to talk about how to get along. It's going to get. We got to find ways to keep the bridges, to keep the door, to rejoice. To rejoice when that one is found. That's part of this story. Both this one that's driven off by contempt and the one in Luke that wanders off because of sin, both of them, what happens? When the shepherd finds them, what happens? He throws a party. It's a big deal. There's rejoicing. There's joy. And I think that's part of it. Remember, this is pointing out who is the good shepherd. It's pointing out the love of God that is demonstrated here in these stories. And so when you look at this, what do we see about the love of God? Well, it's individual. You know? For a group of Jews, that was a big deal because God's love for them was collective. They live in a tribal society. They live in we don't understand that. In America, in the West, especially in Texas, we're fiercely independent. And we have a very individualistic mindset. They did not. They had a very collective mindset that the Jews were God's chosen people. And so you were chosen because of that connection with the group, not because of anything you did or didn't do. But God's love, according to Jesus, is much more individual. He's much more worried about me individually. The tribal mindset, this idea of leaving the 99 to go get the one, it is seeking love. It is rejoicing. That's just what popped into my head, but no? Nobody? Okay. Even so, it is not the will of your Father. No. Wait a minute. It is not the will of your Father that one of these little ones should perish. So we've got who is the greatest. Then we have child. Then we have don't harm one of these little ones who've changed and believe in me. Then if what you're doing, where you're going, or how you see the world is causing that little one to stumble, cut it out. And now we get to the lost sheep. This picture Jesus is painting of a religious community. What do you notice there? Well, I mean, is there anything that is jumping out to you? I'm giving you my takes, and that's, for what it's worth. But what's something that's jumping out to you there, Cody? Uh-huh. Okay, I buy that. Tim. Right. That's a good point. He shifted the focus from inside to outside. That because they, for the folks at home, that he starts off with them wondering which one of us is the greatest, and Jesus ends up turning that whole idea on its head. That the one you should be worried about is out here and not in here. That's a big deal. What about responsibility? What is this? What does this whole section, but specifically the lost sheep, say about our responsibility as Christian community to one another? Anything? Think about the person that you can't stand the most at Huntsville Church of Christ. Think about, because you know there's somebody. We're people, right? Let's be honest. Think about that person. What's our responsibility to that person? What's our responsibility to the other sheep, Jason? To love one another, to value one another. Absolutely. Ms. Pat said we can ask God to help us love that person, and He will. One of my mentors, at one point, I was having some issue, and I had this person that just, and I couldn't walk across the room without them getting mad about it. And I was asking him, how do you handle this? He'd been in ministry for 30, 40 years at that time, and I was just young, starting out. And how do you handle that? And he said, you know what? You pray for that person every day. Because the more you pray for them, God's going to change your heart towards them. Because God's going to help you see them the way He sees them. And that was good advice. Really good advice. And it's hard. Because, you want to pray, Lord, help them not to be so mean. And you want to pray, Lord, show them how wrong they are. But that's not what we're supposed to be about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you asking God to change your heart rather than to change their heart made a huge difference. Because because now He's going to shift His focus as we get into this next section. Because He says, don't despise one of these. Don't cause them to stumble. Don't drive them off. So now, if I'm that person, if someone has sinned against me, instead of wandering off, what am I supposed to do? Funny you should ask, Jesus says. Verse 15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, the assembly. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. So how do we handle conflict? If your brother sins against you, go and tell everybody how much he has hurt your feelings. That's not what he says. If your brother sins against you, go get 3 or 4 more people and y'all go tell him. That's not what he says. We don't like that because that's not the way we are. We don't want to do the one-on-one because that's not fun. That's if Dick has done something to me, now this is not just hurt my feelings. You see that, right? This is sinned against you. Okay? This is not just that he's made me mad or I don't like the way he does something or I got my feelings hurt. This is he has sinned against me. He sinned against me. I'm supposed to go and tell him. So, yeah, but confrontation is scary. How's that supposed to work? I'm going to go and I'm going to tell you, hey, you sinned against me. Now, this is brothers. This is not the person out in the world. Remember, this is in the context of believers. This is in the context of the little ones. And so, we're not talking about people out here. This is not Karen asking to speak to the manager. This is you and your brother one-on-one. And so then when they come to you, what do? Well, first, if he listens to you, what does he say? You've won your brother. If he listens to you, you have gained one, whatever your translation says, your brother. And so the first idea is that person comes to you. I'll give you an example. I had somebody this week who took issue with something that I said. And they weren't mad at me. It wasn't like that. It wasn't I'm going to stomp my foot but it was bothering them. So rather than go and telling the whole church how awful Jeff was, this individual contacted Jeff and said, I need to talk to you. And that's a godly way to handle this. And we met, and they told me what their problem was. And at that moment, what I'm doing is I'm praying, God, okay, is this something you want me to hear? Because I need to know. It may be that, y'all have heard me say as a church, we got to admit that we might be wrong. As an individual, I got to admit that I might be in the wrong. And so instead of getting all defensive and getting my hackles up and being, I gotta say, okay, is there any validity to this? And then once I've done that, then I got to try to show some empathy. I got to put myself, even if I don't agree